Arthak watched through the small gap in the rubble as his master's bloody body collapsed to the ground. The 6 remaining beasts that had slain him erupted in a chorus of cheers as Arthak held back tears. He couldn't cry now. If he made so much as a sound, they would find him. He had to stay hidden. He had to stay alive. He couldn't fight them without his lightsaber. His master, the great Jedi Alex Vrel, had insisted he leave it behind in the temple on Coruscant. A Jedi must be able to rely on more than just his lightsaber, Alex had said. We are so much more than just our blades. Wise words from a man who was now dead. Arthak watched as the beasts began retrieving their blood-soaked blades protruding from Master Alex's body. He had fought well and hard, but these creatures had overwhelmed him with their ferocity. Arthak knew they were not literal beasts, but with their scrap-like metal armor and inhuman masks, he wasn't sure how else to think of them. They fought like savages. Their weapons were jagged and meant to cause pain. They hadn't even touched Arthak, and they had already caused him so much pain. He saw what they had done. Master Alex had been butchered. The greatest Jedi he had ever known, a luminous being no more. Now just a mutilated corpse. No light, no life. This was just supposed to be a simple archaeological dig that they were going to look at. The Nihil were supposedly wiped out at the Kerr Nebula, and even if they weren't, why would they come here? This wasn't some place pirates would raid. Mere marauders had no interest in historical artifacts. Even if some rich collector wanted them, they wouldn't hire the Nihil. Arthak watched as one of the Nihil clapped his hands to get the attention of his cohorts. "Alright, lads, listen up. We need to start searching. The Eye wants some old relic here. Supposedly it's some sort of weapon that could kill a Jedi." "We had a bunch of those already," another pirate hissed from behind his mask as he unsheathed 2 of his bloody daggers, which elicited a chuckle from some of his fellow murderers. "Enough fooling around," the leader said. "Sooner we get this done, the sooner we can go home. Now scram and find that weapon." The Nihil began to disperse. He couldn't see where they all went, but he could see the leader taking his master's lightsaber. One final insult to his master's honor, pilfering his lightsaber from his corpse. Arthak couldn't bear to watch it any longer. He began to crawl through the tunnel and the debris around him. When he had sensed the Nihil approaching, Alex had used the Force to push Arthak down and collapse the stone structure around him. It was masterful and precise. Arthak was untouched by the rubble and hidden, with a tunnel left in the debris for him to go into the excavation to hide. Alex hid his Padawan to save him. Arthak held back tears as he crawled into the dig site. He stood up when he reached an open area within the excavation. There were engravings along the stone walls in some unknown language. In the center of the room there was a pedestal upon which sat a silver gauntlet. Arthak assumed it was the artifact he and his master were sent to investigate, and perhaps what the Nihil were after as well. He found himself just standing at a distance, staring at it. Something about that gauntlet was alluring. He felt compelled to approach it, though he wasn't sure why. What good could it do? He could take it and run, stealing it from the Nihil. But where would he go? His vector was right by where the Nihil ships now resided. There was no way he could get past the Nihil to get to it. Even if he got to his ship, if they saw it take off, they would catch up to him and blast him into oblivion before he could make the jump to hyperspace. The gauntlet called to Arthak, and he took a step toward it. Fighting the Nihil wasn't an option either. Without his lightsaber, he would be all but helpless. Even if he was armed, Arthak had never excelled in combat. Ever since he was a youngling, he had never won a single sparring session in his life. He could never muster any offense. He would just freeze and struggle to keep up a defense. Perhaps it was cowardice, or perhaps it was just pacifism. Either way, he stood no chance here. The Nihil would kill him, and he would die in disgrace, just like Master Alex. The gauntlet called to Arthak, and he took a step toward it. He couldn't simply wait here either. The Nihil were searching the dig site, and it was only a matter of time before they either cleared the rubble or found another path into this chamber. They wouldn't stop until they found what they wanted. They wouldn't stop until he was dead. The gauntlet called to Arthak, and he took a step toward it. Arthak blinked suddenly and looked down, realizing he was holding the gauntlet in his hands. He hadn't remembered picking it up or even consciously choosing to move toward it. He stared at it before suddenly bursting into tears as a flood of sadness engulfed him. Master Alex was dead. Those animals had slaughtered him, and he was helpless to stop it. And now he was simply sitting in these ruins, waiting to die by their hands as well. It wasn't fair. Arthak felt another feeling boiling within him. Rage. It was a strange feeling, unfamiliar to someone peaceful like him. But it numbed the pain of loss, and for that reason he embraced it. He leaned into the hatred, focusing on his contempt for the Nihil. Those monsters had taken his master from him. They needed to pay. They needed to suffer for what they had done. He looked down at the gauntlet. Arthak knew that whatever this was, it could give him power. Despite not knowing, he could sense it through the Force. It was strong, radiating dark power that could strengthen him. He placed it over his right hand and felt that power surge within him. Arthak's fingers on his right hand twitched as the artifact's darkness channeled itself throughout his body. He grinned, continuing to stare at this metal gauntlet. So much power was hidden within such a small piece of armor. But there would be time to revel in this new power later. For now, he had Nihil to kill. Arthak extended his hand, sending a wave of energy from the Force erupting from the gauntlet. The wave sent the rubble blocking the entrance flying into the distance. Some of the rocks went flying into a few of the landed Nihil fighters, which subsequently exploded. Arthak emerged from the structure, no longer a frightened Padawan. He felt no fear, no sorrow, no weakness. All of that was blacked out by the hate. One of the Nihil came running to investigate with 2 blaster pistols in his hands. Arthak, without looking to face him, crushed his crude mask with the Force, immediately breaking through the pirate's skull and piercing his brain. He fell over, dead, one down. "What's going on?" another Nihil yelled. This one, a blue Twi'lek man, came from one of the nearby tunnels from the dig site. Arthak lifted his right hand, and in turn, the Twi'lek began to float in the air. It was effortless, like a child picking up a toy. The Twi'lek fumbled for the blaster in his holster, but was too disoriented at having been lifted several meters in the air by the Force. Arthak slammed his hand downward, and the Twi'lek was quickly sent plummeting headfirst into the rocks beneath him. Arthak could hear the loud breaking of bones as the Twi'lek's body went limp. 2 down. As Arthak marched out of the excavation site, another Nihil rounded the corner wielding a long vibroblade with both hands. He charged toward Arthak, but was stopped by his outstretched right hand. He froze in place, unable to escape the grasp around him. His body twitched, but he was trapped. Arthak used the force to twist this one's arms backwards, redirecting the blade toward his own body. With another force push, he plunged the blade into the Nihil's chest. As he fell to the ground, another Nihil let out a primal battle cry and leapt over a nearby rock to strike down at Arthak with his knives. Arthak extended his gauntlet as it unleashed a torrent of blue lightning, catching the marauder in midair and sending him crashing to the ground. After a few more seconds of screams through the brutal electrocution, that Nihil was little more than a charred corpse. 4 down. By now, the other 2 remaining Nihil were well aware of what was happening. One of them, a Deveronian whose mask left his horns exposed, had begun to run toward the one Nihil ship that remained intact. Arthak wouldn't let him run. The Deveronian fell on his face as Arthak pulled back on his leg with the force and began dragging him back. He desperately tried to dig his fingers into the ground to hold on for dear life, but couldn't get a firm grasp. Arthak pulled him up and held him by the head with his right hand. Arthak physically lifted him off the ground, the power of the dark side augmenting his strength. He turned to the only other Nihil remaining, the one who had taken Master Alex's lightsaber. Arthak looked him in the eye as he crushed the Deveronian's skull within his hand, his gaze never wavering. 1 to go. This Nihil, a balding human with rotten teeth, scowled at Arthak and activated the green lightsaber. "Stay back! If you know what's good for you, you'll stay away from me." His voice was filled with fear. Arthak's voice was filled with hate. "There is no escape for you now. As you killed my master, so too shall I destroy you." Gripping his master's lightsaber through the force, he easily tore it from the Nihil's grasp. Arthak deactivated the blade and rushed toward him. The lightsaber could have cut him down quickly and painlessly. He didn't deserve quick and painless. Arthak physically grabbed him by the throat with his right hand and lifted him high into the air. The Nihil gasped for breath, clawing at the gauntlet in a vain attempt to escape. He knew the fight was hopeless, but his body was acting on instinct. It was primal and pathetic. Arthak continued watching the Nihil's eyes as the life slowly left them. The Nihil died, and Arthak's hate persisted. It raged within him. He struggled to think of anything else. The world around him was a blur. It didn't even seem real. But the hate burned him from the inside, and he needed to release it. These brutes who had killed his master were dead, but this so-called I that had sent them was out there somewhere. He looked down at the gauntlet. Whatever it was powerful and exactly what he needed. He didn't care what it was or what secrets it held. The Nihil called it a Jedi killer, but he would make it a Nihil killer. Arthak approached the last remaining Nihil ship. This was his first step to finding the Eye. The ship held useful data, a handful of comm frequencies and coordinates. It was a start. His hunt to satiate his hate was just beginning. Jedi Knight Zash Hess knelt beside the body of Alex Vrel. He let out a deep, mournful breath. Just shy of a decade ago, Alex had been Zash's master. The two had remained friends over the years, and when he heard the Order lost contact with Alex, Zash was the first to volunteer to investigate. He had tried to prepare himself for the possibility that his master had passed on, but this gruesome scene had shocked him. Seeing his old master's body was one thing, But the half a dozen Nihil corpses were even more shocking. They were brutalized, mutilated, and one of them was even missing a head. But they hadn't been killed by Alex. They had not been killed by a lightsaber. But who else would have killed them? Zash knew there was one person left unaccounted for. Arthak. His master's new Padawan was not among the bodies, and was nowhere to be found. This led to one obvious answer. Arthak killed these Nihil. But Zash couldn't believe that. It simply wasn't possible. Arthak was maybe the most gentle Jedi Zash had ever met. Zash had spent some time getting to know him at the temple, and he had never seen a hint of harshness or aggression from him. He was a pacifist to his core. Even if he saw what the Nihil did to Alex, he wouldn't have been capable of this. Zash stood and looked over to the Jedi who had accompanied him, a Mirialan archivist named Jarrell Rylus, who was currently looking over his droid's sensor readouts. "Have you found him yet?" Zash asked. Rylus shook his head. "The only two life forms on this planet are the two of us. If Arthak isn't among the bodies, then he's not on this planet anymore. Or he escaped from here and died somewhere else on the planet." "I highly doubt that," Zash said, choosing not to address Rylus's lack of tact when it came to discussing the possibility of a Padawan's death. "It's only been a couple of days. Arthak could survive that long on his own without succumbing to the elements. If Arthak got away or survived, why didn't he make contact? Or he could have made it back to Coruscant or Starlight Beacon by now. Is it possible the Nihil captured him?" "There were 5 Nihil fighters found in proximity of the dig site. One short of the 6 bodies here, which means one fighter got away. But if it's like these other 5, then it can only fit one person, and the vector that brought the 2 Jedi is still here. Which means Arthak took the Nihil fighter. But why?" Zash looked to his Mirialan compatriot and noticed the grim expression on his face. "You know something I don't." Rylus sighed. "The artifact is missing as well, and I fear it may be the key to what happened here." "What kind of artifact were Alex and Arthak sent here to retrieve?" "There were rumors of an old lost Sith artifact here. This relic is known as the Hand of Demise. It was a gauntlet made of frick, wielded by an ancient Sith Lord known as Darth Demise. Supposedly it carries some of his lingering essence. At some point a few thousand years ago, it was stolen from the Jedi and lost to time. A few weeks ago, an archaeological team based outside of the Republic contacted us and said they found something that might interest us. They seemed pretty spooked by the idea it could be Sith, so they evacuated this dig site and left it here for us. Master Vrel was sent to retrieve it and return it to the temple for purification or destruction." "Only 2 Jedi were sent to retrieve a Sith artifact?" "Many Jedi are busy with duties establishing Starlight Beacon. Plus, we don't know for sure if it is Sith. That's just what the archaeologists thought." Zash's eyes widened. "You think the Hand of Demise is possessing Arthak?" Rylus let out a deep breath. "I don't know. If it is the Hand or some other similar dark side relic, it could be influencing him to some extent, and that could explain how these Nihil died." Zash turned and started back toward his vector. "Wait!" Rylus called out. "Where are you going?" "There's a lost Padawan out there who needs my help. He's probably lost, angry, and alone with whatever he found here influencing him. So I've got to find him. For Alex. I'm headed back to Starlight Beacon to watch out for reports on the Nihil's whereabouts, since he's probably out for revenge. I'll find him. I'll save him." Arthak charged forward, impaling another Nihil upon his lightsaber with one hand, while unleashing a torrent of lightning from the other. This Nihil encampment was almost clear. He walked over the charred corpses of the pirates, heading straight for the command tent. His black armor was soaked in blood, and yet he still wanted to shed more. The hate within him had not been satiated, even after almost a year. In that year, he had developed quite the reputation. The Nihil had come to fear him. They knew someone was coming for them, and would slaughter them without mercy. They knew the Nihil killer was out there somewhere, hunting, and sooner or later they would be his prey. On this day, this little storm became his prey. And with each group he killed, he got closer to his true target. Since the attack on the Republic Fair, he had heard the name of the Eye, Lorna D. Arthak used the Force to tear apart the command tent, leaving it in tatters. There was one last Nihil, a human without a mask, using a holocom to communicate with a masked figure. Arthak bisected him with his blade and looked down at the hologram. The holographic man in the mask cocked his head, intrigued but seemingly unconcerned. "I take it you are the so-called Nihil killer?" the man asked. His voice sounded strained, as if it pained him to speak, and yet he still sounded calm in the presence of Arthak. "Where is the Eye of the Nihil? Where is Lorna D?" The masked man scoffed. "Wouldn't you like to know? Perhaps you should concern yourself instead with the individuals standing behind you." The hologram transmission then cut out. Arthak turned sharply, lightsaber hilt in hand, to face whomever stood in his way. Zash was hardly able to recognize the young man who stood before him. He didn't see the friendly, shy, pacifistic young Jedi that had studied under his old master. Gone was his gentle demeanor, his soft-spoken voice, everything that made Arthak who he was. What stood before him now was a vengeful beast. He wore black heavy armor, and fresh blood caked his flesh and hair. His eyes were filled with hunger and bloodlust. Those eyes didn't even seem to recognize Zash. He also couldn't sense Arthak's presence through the Force. All he could sense was the darkness emanating from the gauntlet on Arthak's right hand. "What has become of you, my old friend?" Zash asked sorrowfully. "I've done what I had to do," Arthak said. "While you and the rest of the Jedi have been licking the Chancellor's boots, I've been dealing with the real threat and saving our master's legacy." "Arthak, I've seen the bodies you've left in your wake. Over 100 dead. For what? To avenge our master? No amount of bloodshed can bring him back, Arthak." Suddenly Arthak charged at Zash. He ignited his lightsaber and swung it down at his old friend. Zash just barely had time to ignite his own green blade to parry the blow. He also barely had the strength to hold off Arthak's blade. Arthak wasn't this naturally strong, but the dark side and the gauntlet were augmenting his strength. After the shock had passed from the sudden, unprovoked attack, Zash realized the blade Arthak was using was a deep crimson. He glanced at the hilt, and his heart sank even further. It was the hilt that had belonged to their old master. "What have you done to his lightsaber?" Zash asked sadly. A twisted grin emerged on Arthak's face. "I improved it. I made it stronger by purging the weakness." Zash mustered a burst of energy through the force and used it to push Arthak several meters back. You've corrupted it. You haven't preserved our master's legacy, you've perverted it. Zash raised his lightsaber defensively. How did you even know how to bleed the crystal? Arthak smirked. It was instinct. Without the shackles of the Jedi, I found ways to become far stronger than I was. Was it instinct? Or was it something that artifact put into your mind? Arthak began to approach slower, like a predator sizing up its prey. I won't let you stand in my way. The Eye of the Nihil must pay for what she has done. She will know pain and fear before I tear her limb from limb. Zash glanced down at the gauntlet, feeling how the darkness that enveloped Arthak was concentrated around it. Arthak, you need to take off that gauntlet, he said, trying to sound as calm as possible. He needed to talk to Arthak as his friend if he was going to save him. It's corrupting you. It's poisoning your thoughts. The Arthak I knew would never seek vengeance. It's manipulating you with thoughts and feelings that aren't yours. For a moment, Arthak's expression faltered. His hateful glare turned contemplative as he glanced down at his right hand that gripped his lightsaber. He focused on it intently. For a moment, Zash thought he was fighting his influence, until Arthak began to laugh. I see what you're doing, he said darkly. He pointed his crimson blade at Zash. You're jealous of my power. You've seen what I achieved, and you want to take that power for yourself. I just want my friend back, Zash said sadly. I want to see the Padawan that Master Alex was so proud of. Liar! Arthak yelled as he charged and unleashed a flurry of strikes that Zash struggled to parry. He began forcing Zash into a retreat, continually pushing him back with a brutal series of slashes with his red saber. You covet my power. You want to take it from me so that you can destroy me. Zash ducked from another slash and slid between Arthak's legs, using the force to propel himself and fuel his momentum. He stood and ran a few more meters to get some more distance between him and Arthak. His opponent did not immediately pursue, instead slowly turning to face Zash again. Think of everything you've done, Arthak. Think of everyone you've murdered, Zash said, barely holding back tears. Alex Varel would be ashamed of you. Arthak scowled. Alex is dead. It doesn't matter how he would feel. He walked forward and locked blades with Zash again. I'll use his blade to kill everyone who stands in my way, be them Nihil or Jedi. A Jedi must be able to rely on more than just his lightsaber. We are so much more than our blades, Zash said, echoing his old master's teachings. For a moment, Arthak's expression softened. His eyes widened in recognition at those words. For just that second, Zash saw a glimmer of the boy he once knew. That glimmer was quickly snuffed out as a torrent of darkness from the gauntlet invaded his mind once more. Arthak's face darkened and he began to scream. With his right hand, he used the gauntlet to grab Zash's lightsaber by the blade. The lightsaber-resistant metal quickly heated and began to glow, but the pain didn't matter to Arthak. He would only feel it for a moment. Arthak pulled Zash's lightsaber aside before plunging his own blade into Zash's chest. He pressed the hilt against his chest as hard as he could, pushing him to the ground. Zash looked upon Arthak one last time as the light faded from within him. His face expressed sorrow, not fear, as Arthak had come to expect from his victims. Slowly, his head fell to the side. and Zash Hess was no more. Arthak stood over the Jedi's corpse. He was ready to revel in his victory, but for the first time in a year, the horror of what he had done sank in. The hate that had flooded his mind and consumed his every waking moment was suddenly gone. Arthak touched his face with his left hand, feeling the warm blood that had been splattered across his face. He thought back to every brutal murder he had committed all at once. Every limb severed, every head crushed, and every body charred by lightning scarred his mind. The hate hadn't just blocked out the pain of loss, but also the gruesome reality of what he had done. And now the pain was back and stronger than ever. Arthak began to cry and scream as he was overcome by shame. The two people he had cared for most were now dead. One had died by his own hand. And for what? Arthak couldn't even explain why he had killed Zash. He thought back to what Zash was trying to tell him. Every word Zash had said became a dagger in his heart. The darkness had receded from his mind. The foundation of what Arthak had become over the past year suddenly vanished, and his mind began to collapse. He fell to the ground, sobbing and broken. He didn't know how long he remained on the ground, screaming and wailing. It could have been minutes or hours. His perception was slipping, and he felt disconnected from reality. Suddenly, the fingers on his right hand began to twitch. The sounds of weeping suddenly vanished. It was now dead silence. Arthak slowly rolled over onto his stomach and pushed himself upward. He steadily stood up and let out a deep breath. Arthak had not consciously chosen to do any of these things. What was happening? He wasn't doing these things, but he watched as his body did them. He tried to move his arms, but he couldn't. They remained by his side. He couldn't move any part of himself. He wanted to frantically turn and look around his environment, but his body remained out of his control. He couldn't even scream. What is this? He thought. What's happening to me? You've set me free. A voice came from Arthak's mouth. It wasn't Arthak. It was something else. Your mind isn't strong enough to resist me now, so I think I'll take this body off your hands. A pathetic wretch like you has little use for it. What are you? Arthak's body began to laugh. I was once a dark lord of the Sith, feared by all Jedi. My essence lingered in that gauntlet for thousands of years, waiting for a worthy host to facilitate my return. The process was arduous. I could influence your thoughts and feelings, but you had a strong will. To take your body permanently, I had to weaken your mind and shatter your psyche beyond repair. And now that you can no longer fight me, you have the privilege of witnessing my return. Arthak tried with all his might to control any part of his body. He needed to take the gauntlet off. He had to free himself. But his body was no longer his, and his mind was just a prisoner within it, forced to watch, unable to act. His body stepped over Zash's corpse and walked through the camp. He watched as Darth Demise, the Sith Lord he had inadvertently unleashed, made his return to the galaxy. He could have stopped this. He could have allowed himself to feel the pain of losing his master instead of burying it beneath the hate Demise gave him. Arthak wished Alex Varel had not saved him from the Nihil.